Hello everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and today I'll be giving my objections to William Lane Craig's view of penal substitution on the basis of vicarious liability. To give context, here is the short video of Craig going over it.
Many people have objected to the doctrine of penal substitution, which says that Christ bore the suffering which was the appropriate punishment for our sins, on the grounds that an innocent third party cannot be punished for the sins or crimes that another has committed. And despite the popularity of this objection, in fact, there are in Western legal systems good examples of where, in fact, innocent third parties are punished for the crimes or wrongdoing of a third party. And this is one of these is called vicarious liability, in which the wrongdoing or crimes of a subordinate are imputed to his superior. And this typically works itself out in employer-employee relationships, where the employer is the one that can be convicted and sentenced for crimes committed by his employee. And in my book, Atonement and the Death of Christ, I give fascinating examples of where this principle operates in Western legal justice systems. Now, what this would imply, if you apply this to God, is that God declares Jesus Christ to be vicariously liable for the crimes and the sins that we commit. That doesn't mean that Jesus becomes an evil person, an unvirtuous, selfish, corrupted person. It just means that legally, our wrongdoing is imputed to him so that he becomes legally liable for those crimes and therefore can be appropriately punished by God, the judge, for those crimes, thereby exonerating us from punishment and affording us the possibility of a divine pardon of our sins.
Now, while Craig tries to defend the idea that Jesus taking on humanity's sins is justifiable through legal analogies, there are major problems with this comparison. Let's break this down. First, vicarious liability in law is strictly limited, as legal scholar Dr. Paula Geigler points out in her paper on vicarious liability. It really only applies to specific relationships like, say, an employer and an employee, and even then only when the wrongdoing happens in the course of employment. This, one can argue, rules out most human sin, as it is hard to say that we are Yahweh's employees, and sinning isn't something that is done on Yahweh's behalf. Next, medical legal scholar Graham Brock, writing about medical liability, points out that vicarious liability doesn't apply when someone acts outside their role or commits gross negligence. That means if you go rogue, it is unlikely that your boss will cover you. This is relevant as human sin is by definition a rebellion against divine instruction, and not something Yahweh can be held accountable for. There's also the point that economist Dr. Morky Huse stated in his paper on the subject that shows that employers are often held liable because they failed to manage their subordinates properly. Now, this can't be applied to Yahweh, as classical theism teaches that Yahweh is perfect and can't fail. This means that the core justification for vicarious liability, that being bad management, doesn't work for Yahweh. We shouldn't forget another key disanalogy. which is consent. Vicarious liability in law doesn't require the boss to volunteer to take the blame. It's imposed whether they like it or not. This is different from penal substitution because Christ must volunteer for it to work. This is a departure in how legal systems handle vicarious guilt. Finally, there's a proportionality problem. In law, an employer might be fined or sued for what their employee did, but in penal substitution, Jesus, who is depicted as a sinless man, is being tortured and killed. No court would ever go for that, and ever go for as far as that, and consider it a just punishment for another's wrongdoing. That would be seen as a moral outrage. To wrap this up, I hope I've done my part in showing Craig's analogy to vicarious liability isn't just weak, but very flawed, and it results in violating the very principles of the legal doctrine he claims to be using to justify penal substitution. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.